All right. Good morning. Happy Monday, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our presentation today from Counselor Connect. We are going to talk about using tiers 2 and 3 data to guide planning. So let's go ahead and get started. We will introduce ourselves today. So I am Sam Vidal, and I am an employee of the Central Indiana Educational Service Center. And Counselor Connect is a part of the CIESC. And I am joined by Angie Ness, who is also here. Angie, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Angie Ness. I was a school counselor here in Indiana for a little over 8 years. I am up north. I am in Elkhart County. A few years ago, I decided to move out of the school system and join Hatching Results. So I travel all over the country training school counselors on comprehensive school counseling programs. And I've been part of this Counselor Connect team for a few years as well. So I'm really excited to be here with you all.
Thanks, Angie. And I was laughing because when we put our descriptions under our pictures, a lot of them were very similar. So we're both called professional learning specialists, but she's with Hatching Results and I'm with CIESC. So we are often working together in situations like this. All right, so for today, our objectives, we're hoping that you can learn how to implement a process to analyze your student data and then determine effective interventions through that data, and then go on to develop strategies that you can plan lessons and curriculum to meet the needs that you've identified. Just kind of to let you know what we're going to cover today, we're going to start by talking about MTMDSS and tiers 2 and 3 as some background knowledge before we really dive into data metrics and determining root causes, selecting interventions, and then talking about small group best practices. And throughout all of these steps, we will also go through a scenario example.
Sam,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing your screen? I want to make sure.
I am.
I don't see it. Does everybody else see it?
Oh, you know what? I am so sorry. It's Monday, isn't it?
It absolutely is
Uh,
Monday.
Thank you for telling
Unfortunately.
me that. Okay, there we go. Is that
All right,
better?
there we go. Yep, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, thanks for letting me know. All right. So I went through our objectives and kind of our agenda for what we're going to talk about. And let's start by putting in the chat, what is your comfort level with using data? So go ahead and tell us. You can see these cute faces on the screen. Which one of those looks like how you feel about data right now? Let's see what we've got. Some 3s, some 7s, 5s. All right. 2, 3, 4. All right, awesome. Well, hopefully at the end of this, you are feeling more confident and you're more like number 7 or number 1. And we're going to start, Angie's going to give us an MTMDSS overview and how that fits into what we're talking about today. So I'll turn it over to Angie.
Yes, and I'll just let you know when I need slides to move, Sam. So you can go to the next slide. So I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but we thought we should do just a quick review and overview of what how school counseling works in a tiered system. So of course, most of your schools, I'm sure, use MTSS. As school counselors, we use MTMDSS, making sure that we have all 3 domains in our programs: academic, college, career, and social emotional. And this tiered system is aligned to the Ask a National model. It helps us make sure that we are equitably serving students, that we are demonstrating impact through data. So we know at Tier 1, every single student, because they are enrolled in our school, deserves to get school counseling curriculum, individual student planning, and any district and school-wide programs and activities. And then we use data to really intentionally look at students that are going to need more. Go to the next slide. So we know students need more, but how we know they need more is really, like I said, informed by data. You can go ahead and just click through, Sam. So sometimes we just kind of put in tier 2 services because people tell us they want it done. You know, teachers say, I have these students that need something. Administrators tell us we need to serve these certain students. But really, if we want to do this equitably, we use data. And this is helping us justify why certain students get services and why certain students don't. It's helpful to look at data that you use to see if there are any student groups that are inequitably receiving services or not receiving services. So thinking about those squeaky wheels, right? Are we only providing services to students because either they are the squeaky wheel or their families or their teachers, you know, these people that know the system and know how to use the system? Or are there certain students that are not getting it because they kind of fly under the radar and they don't have somebody that can advocate for them? We want to make sure that we create systems that use data, attendance engagement data, behavior data, any outcome data to qualify students for tier 2 services, to make sure that they get what they need, sometimes before they even know that they need it. So if you go to the next slide for me. We know, we hope that being tier 2 data driven doesn't mean that we're just waiting for teacher referrals. Teacher referrals are often biased because we're human. And so we want to make sure we take as much of that bias out as possible. We want to proactively collect data regularly to qualify students for tier 2 interventions. So for me in my schools, about a month into the school year, once students kind of acclimated to the new school year, I would look at data to see where students were at. And then I would look at data at a minimum every quarter to see, again, where students are at, what they need, so I could proactively scoop them into tier 2 or tier 3 services before it got too late. These data metrics that we look at and that I looked at really should be aligned to the district priorities. So if you look at your district strategic plan or even your school improvement plans, to see what's important to the schools. A lot of times it might be test scores, which really is outside of the realm of school counseling. But what we can do as school counselors is figure out students that are not doing well on test scores. Why is that? Is it because they're not coming to school? Well, I can do an attendance intervention. Is it because they're in the office a lot? Maybe I could do some skills building to keep them out of the office, or some systems advocacy for teachers that may be disproportionately sending students to the office. Whatever that is, we want to make sure that the data we look at is aligned to the school or the district goals, because that creates buy-in for administrators, for your district personnel, for your school board to be able to do what you need to do. You want to go to the next slide. So when we're thinking about planning tier 2 interventions and programming, we have to think about, what do we want those targeted students to know, or what do they need access to in those 3 domains of academic, college, career, and social emotional learning. And then we also have to think about how we want to deliver these interventions. It's not always just the school counselor that is doing these things. Who else can we rely on? Is it school psychs or school social workers? Is it other staff members? Is it outside resources and providers? So what do students need? Do they need small group interventions? Do they need mentoring in the community? Other things that we can do with families, like book studies, or just providing consultation and information? Do we need just resource like food and healthcare resources? What supports do they need outside of the school? Next slide. And then, of course, specific interventions. Are we doing a small group to build some skills? Are we doing individual meetings to address failing grades? Consulting with families or staff? Collaborating with teachers to help them to work together to address student needs? Or are we working in our building level student assistant teams? And then, of course, tier 3, we know that there are some students that need more intensified services. This generally is short term. It's generally just a few students, 5 to 10% of your school should not need, or more than 5 to 10% of your school should not need Tier 3 services. But this is necessary for students that maybe are in those Tier 2 supports that are not experiencing any progress. So doing more intensive services with them. We know crises are happening every day with our students. So those are some Tier 3 services we have to use. There are some students that come to us with some Tier 3 needs that we can't just let them do whatever they want. We have to provide that support to make that not only transition go well, but also continue those supports that they needed before. Sometimes we have students that are not appropriate for group counseling or another Tier 2 support. In an elementary school that I was at, that was a case for me. A family wanted her student in a small group. The student wasn't quite there where she could effectively interact with a group without kind of throwing things off the rails. So I had to do a little Tier 3 one-on-one work with her before I could put her into a small group setting. And then, of course, we know that students and families always need referrals to outside resources, which is a Tier 3 need. We also want to know, and I'm sure this was kind of drilled into you in your master's program like it was in mine, that school counselors do not do therapy. So therapy generally is more long-term, more intense, more heightened psychological needs. That is not within the appropriate role or scope of a school counselor because we just don't have the time for that. We're more like the emergency department, right? We do what we can do in the moment with some short-term interventions and other things that students need. We need to make sure, our role is to make sure that they get the support they need outside of the school system or within another school program that's not the school counseling program. So if students need more than short-term counseling or more than short-term interventions, then we need to refer out. It's also good to kind of talk about the difference between counseling and therapy because they're very, very similar. We're doing the same types of things. We're using the same types of counseling theories and interventions and skills. But counseling, again, is related to specific issues. So if you can't identify what the issue is, that's probably not counseling. It's generally focused on skill development, and it's usually short-term. And I'm going to make a little side note is short-term doesn't necessarily mean if I see them 3 times, I'm done with them. If they do a 6 to 8 week small group, I'm done with them. Short-term might mean the entire school year of focused, quick check-ins. It's what they need if in the moment to make them successful. Therapy are those broader, more complex issues and concerns that may be long-term. So those students that are dealing with depression or severe anxiety or other psychological issues that need more intensive services from a psychologist or a psychiatrist or some other mental health professional, that needs to be done outside. I do want to say, though, even if you have students that are in therapy outside, your job is not done because those students still need support in the school building, especially with connecting what's going on outside in the mental health professional's office and what happens at the school. So don't forget that even if you've referred out, even if they're getting long-term therapy from someone else, school counselors still bridge that gap and kind of take what they learn outside into the school. So thinking about Tier 3 planning and programming. So again, thinking about what they need to know or have access to. So goal-oriented short-term individual counseling is appropriate for school counselors to do. Individual check-ins with progress monitoring, crisis screening, support and follow-up, and of course that referral to outside services. So some more specific examples, individual counseling, as I said, following up after extended absences. I would do this often for students that were inpatient. Or I also had some students who would go visit family outside of the country, would be gone for weeks, if not months. So making sure that they reintegrate into the school would be a Tier 2 or Tier 3 service I would provide. Those referrals. And then also just don't forget to view all 3 domains. Those students, especially at the high school level, that are dealing with transitioning from school to life after school, or those students that maybe got a college application rescinded need a little extra tier 3 support to navigate through that issue.
Okay, thanks, Angie. So you've probably seen different graphics that might be similar to this one. This is just a graphic that we created to help us go through the process today. And we're going to review each of these steps. So you can see the first one is to analyze outcome data. The second is to analyze supplemental data. The third is to choose your intervention. The fourth is to implement your intervention. And then at the end, review your data and determine your next steps. So we're going to go through this process. And as we go, we're going to show you a sample scenario of what that might look like for looking at data and determining what intervention would fit for a tier 2 or tier 3 setting. This process and these steps, like Angie said, really help us to make sure that we are not just sitting and waiting for referrals. I think that was one thing that I really have learned over the years. I thought I was being really proactive, but I was really relying on referrals for a lot of my services. And using this process and data is going to help us to make sure that we are including equity and access into our program. And it also ensures that we have a school counseling program, not just a person in a position. So the services that are being delivered to students don't just change because of the personality of the person that's employed at that time. So let's start with the first step. We want to start with outcome data. Now, outcome data includes achievement, attendance, and discipline data. That is what ASCA says is outcome data that we should really spend a lot of our time analyzing. And what we want to do is identify concerns and trends. So what you can start with is the school improvement plan. So identify what are the goals that your school or your district have already identified as concerns. If you can, try to get on the school improvement plan committee so that you can be a part of that conversation. But take a look and see what's already identified as something that your school wants to improve and focus on. And then decide, how can you get access to that data? Who is the data guru that you can befriend that can help you get your hands on some of this data? And then decide, looking at these goals, how can the school counseling program contribute to that? So for example, this school, this is pretty common. A school might choose iLearn data as their goal. Now, the school counselor doesn't necessarily have to choose iLearn as their data source, but you can see here, they're focusing on English language arts and math. So you can look and see what academic skills and what domain are they focusing on. So maybe your school improvement plan is really focused on reading and writing, and then that is an area of focus, and you can determine, how can my school counseling program contribute to that? This is a great resource from Hatching Results, and it is linked so that you can access it. But it's important to have set data metrics that you're looking at on a regular basis to determine what needs your students have. So when you look at this worksheet, there are several examples on there, but then there's also a blank page where you can work with the members of your team, could be other school counselors, administrators, and come to an agreement on data metrics that you want to focus on. So for example, it could be anyone that has 3 or more office referrals every grading period. That could be your data metric. And so anyone who fits that is someone that you are going to intervene with. Or let's say 2 or more Fs in a core content area, and you look at that every grading period. And those students, need some extra support. So depending on your student information system, again, befriend someone who is great at pulling these data reports. And once you do that, you can kind of create your own dashboard if you don't already have something like this in your student information system. Create your own kind of dashboard in a spreadsheet so that you can disaggregate the data and look for trends. If you need some tips on these specific skills for spreadsheets on how to sort and how to analyze the data and disaggregate it, we do have a series that Angie and I were a part of called Talk Data to Me, and that is linked on this slide. And they are just some quick YouTube videos to show you how to do some of these skills with spreadsheets. Okay, let's start with an example. So we're going to use an intermediate school, that's grades 5 and 6, as our scenario. So for this intermediate school, last school year, there were 18 students who were chronically absent. Now, again, that definition of chronically absent is something that your school might determine, but typically for the state, it's missing 10% or more of the school year. So you've seen that last school year, 18 students in both of these grades were chronically absent. Now it's August, it's the beginning of the next school year. And so now 12 of those students are still attending your school. They were 5th graders last year and now they're in grade 6. So it looks like 6 of those students don't go to our school anymore. So we've lost those students because we know sometimes transiency can be something that affects who we work with. So out of those 12 students who are still attending our school, 8 of them are on track to have chronic absenteeism again. So again, depending on your set data metrics, it could be maybe this is the end of the first grading period. And so far, they've missed 10% of the school year, and they're on track to continue that trend. So 8 of these students are on track to do this again. And our attendance logs show a mix of excused and unexcused absences. So I looked in my student information system. I looked at the code that the attendance secretaries put in there to see why they were absent. And then there are also 2 additional students that maybe they weren't here last year or they weren't chronically absent last year, but they are on track to be chronically absent this year. So this is an example of looking at that data at the beginning of the school year and seeing, according to the data metric, who is at risk of missing school and needing a tier 2 intervention. So now that I've looked at my outcome data and I've determined for attendance, these are the kids that really need some extra support. Now I need to find out why they're missing school. So we know that attendance is an issue, but we don't really know why. And that's where our supplemental data can be really helpful. So according to ASCA, supplemental data is really soliciting opinions, beliefs, and insights from stakeholders who are directly involved with students. So that could be parents, teachers, administrators, and the students themselves. So this is where we're getting their feedback and their beliefs about certain topics. So for this, we might want to talk to these stakeholders and find out, what do they think is going on? Why do they think they are missing school or these students are missing school? And this really helps us get down to the root cause of what's going on. Because it would be very easy to say, okay, these students are missing school. I'm going to do a group about why school is important and motivation. But we don't know if that's the reason why they're not coming to school. Maybe they do like school and they do try when they're there, but there's some other barrier that's keeping them from going. So you can see here, this is another great linked document from Attendance Works, and it really outlines the different reasons why students might not be coming to school. So it's not always that they just don't want to go or they're not motivated. It could be a barrier that's keeping them from attending. There could be something that's making them not want to come to school. Maybe it's not school itself, but maybe there's a peer issue that they're trying to avoid. It could be they have no meaningful relationships with adults, so they're just not engaged. Or it could even be misconceptions from the students or the family themselves. Maybe they think, you know, if there's even a little bit of a sniffle, I need to keep my student home. So here are some great tools that you can explore for your own usage to help uncover root causes. Now, we know that needs assessments are super helpful, but a lot of times school districts are kind of moving away from those needs assessments just based on recent legislation that's kind of scared people away from that. But there are other ways you can get to the root cause of what's going on. So we have on here minute meetings, the 5 whys. Of course, panorama is very helpful. And then there could be needs assessments that you develop yourself as a counselor, as a department, or as a school. There's also, if you go through the Carrying the Torch process, there's a free needs assessment that's included there. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel and write those questions yourself. And then we have a couple other things on here, like the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, the grit scale. So you can really get to the bottom of how students and stakeholders are feeling and what is really going on behind the absences from school. So here we're going back to our scenario. We have our 6th grade students who are on track to be chronically absent. And if we look at our needs assessment, our minute meeting data, we find out that 8 of those students are reporting high anxiety or worries or stress related to school. Now, 2 of the students did not report any stress or heightened worries or anxiety. They reported vacations and illnesses, and that was why they've missed school so far. So we're seeing a trend with 8 of these students that have kind of similar reasons why they're not attending school. So now I need to choose my intervention. And since I have 8 students who have a similar need, of course, I'm already starting to think in the back of my head, okay, group counseling might be a good fit here so I can meet the needs of all these students with the limited time that I have. So according to ASCA, this is just a visual of the process that we go through when we are determining an intervention, writing a lesson plan, etc. So first we want to start with that outcome data, which we've already done. And now we're going to determine what are those skills, what are the mindsets and behaviors these students need to master in order to improve in this area. And then we're going to turn those into learning objectives. So for these students, they've said that anxiety and stress management is really hard for them, and this is causing them to miss school. So when I look at the mindsets and behaviors from ASCA, the one that is really the best fit is effective coping skills. So they need some skills to cope with the stress or worries that they're dealing with. So now I want to operationalize that, and I want to determine what do I want students to be able to do. So I think self-talk is really going to help them to work through this. I want them to have a toolbox full of coping strategies that they can pull from. And then we want students to have that self-awareness where they can rate the intensity of how they're feeling. So I've selected one standard from ASCA, mindsets and behaviors. I operationalize that into some learning objectives. And this is the part where I think in practice, sometimes counselors will do this the opposite way. But according to ASCA, what we need to do now is to align our pre-post test questions before we actually land on the specific activity that we want to do. So if we think about the standard that I chose on coping skills and those learning objectives, we now want to turn those into pre-post tests. And we want to come up with our data collection plan. How are we going to know if we were successful? So my learning objective, remember, I wanted them to rate the intensity of how they're feeling. And so I think scaling data is really going to be helpful for that, where I ask them to rate their feelings on a scale of 1 to 10. So I'm going to get that data. I'm also going to have those pre-post test questions. And then I'm going to have just the participation data, which is when I share who attended, when we met, how often we met, and take attendance for that group as well. Now, remember, we had 2 students we're not including in our group. And so we still want to meet their needs too. So they're not a part of this group, but we can still set some goals and meet with them on a more individual basis, which we'll look at in just a second. So for our group, before we choose the specific curriculum or activity that we're going to do, we're going to turn our learning objectives into a pre-post test. So we want to use the same questions for both the pre and the post. So we want to give the pre-test before we start our intervention. And then when the intervention or activity is done, we give those same questions and we compare to see if there is an improvement. And this is where we're really focusing on the attitudes, knowledge, and skills that the students have. So the questions are really kind of those I believe, I know, and I can type of questions. Now you can do all different types of questions. You can do knowledge questions, you can do fill in the blank, short answer, multiple choice. But really, the 4-point Likert scale is, in my opinion, the easiest way to get some quick data that you can, you don't have to spend a ton of time grading. Depending on the intervention. Now, this is only 8 students, but if you were doing a pre-post test for like a couple of classrooms and you asked 5 or 6 fill in the blank questions for all of those students, that would take quite a bit of time for you to grade and look at the data and figure out what to do with it. But when you do a Likert scale, you have more objective data that you can look at right away. The 4-point Likert scale is really the best practice because you're not allowing them to have an I don't know answer or something kind of in the middle. So we're forcing them to choose one way or another. There's not something where they can say undecided or I don't know. And of course, we're trying to assess that coping skills standard and those learning objectives that we set. I linked here an example of some pre-post test questions for the specific learning objectives that I just shared with you. So hopefully that can be helpful. Now, I also want to get that scaling data that I mentioned because I want to see if they can identify the intensity of their feelings and notice it in others. So I do have a couple of scaling sheets that you could use or adapt for your own purposes. The first one where I say simple, that's like a very old school Word document version that I used to use. And then the one that's on the screen here is a little bit of a cuter version from Canva that is a template that you can kind of manipulate yourself. And I would bring this scale to every time I see the student and have them rate their feelings, the intensity of their feelings. And then for participation data, that's really just the facts like who was there, how long did we meet, how often did we meet, and it's a way for you to take attendance if you're in a group setting. I also linked a planning document here where you can plan out, if you're doing a group, the sessions, what activity you're doing, and then any materials you need and which students were absent. If we think about those 2 individual students, so they did not report any heightened worries or stress. They said illnesses and vacations, right? But we still know that they're on track to be chronically absent, which is not good. We don't want them to miss school. So instead, we're going to meet with them individually. That seems like a better fit. So we could do some parent outreach, and we could also do some individual check-ins with the student. And I have some things linked here for you. So one is just a parent or guardian communication log. Now you could do a spreadsheet, of course, or you could use, if you're a paper pencil person, you could print this out and just keep track of how often you're reaching out to the parents or guardians and any notes. And then I also have a template for keeping track of your individual meetings with students. And this is just one that I made, but I like it because it has you identify what are the skills that the student needs, maybe even some sub skills that they need. And then it helps you to really plan what is our focus, what is our goal, and then what are we going to do. So it really gives more structure to those individual meetings. Okay, so we have already looked at our data. We've selected our standard. We've written our learning objectives and our pre-post test questions. We have our data collection plan. Now we need to determine what are we actually going to use with this small group? How are we going to help them to master these skills and standards? So of course we've already identified the students who need more, and now we need to determine what are our resources? What do we have available? Do we have time to meet with these students? Can we get support from our administrators and teachers to maybe meet with them during a common time, or try to find a way that they're not missing that core instruction time, but you can still give this support to them. And then of course, we want to deliver our intervention, which we'll talk about in just a second. So when I'm looking at interventions to choose, here are some really great resources that you can explore. And whenever we can, it's good to choose an intervention that's evidence-based or even research-based, so that we know this is an intervention that works and has been effective in similar situations for other school counselors. Of course, there's always teachers pay teachers, and there's a lot of cute stuff out there, but we want to make sure that with our limited time with our students, that we are picking something that is going to be effective and it's proven to work. So these are some great resources to explore. Now for this pretend situation, this scenario, I chose to use the Coping Cat curriculum. Now I'm using this as an example because this is something I've done in real practice in real life. And this is an evidence-based curriculum for heightened worries or anxiety. And there is a small group curriculum for this, and it's pretty inexpensive. So I've used this in the past. I think it was like $26 for just the one workbook that I used. I like this because I know it's evidence-based, it's proven that it's effective, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel. The sessions are outlined for me and the activities are outlined for me that I can use. Of course, you give it your own personality, but you try to follow it with fidelity as much as you can. Now, if you don't find something out there that really fits exactly what you want, you can create your own. And then you'll want to plan out how many sessions will that need? What's the scope and sequence for this group? And what are the topics that I need to cover each time we meet? And then I also have a parent permission letter linked here as well, because we know best practice is we want to get permission for small group work. Okay, we've looked at the data. We've looked at the supplemental data. We've chosen our intervention. We have a plan. Now Angie's going to talk about actually implementing that intervention.
Yeah, so this is like the most important part. We've done all this planning and all of this data analysis and all of this preparation to get to this point where we can actually do something with the students, which is the most fun part, to be honest. So before we go to the next slide, Sam, I'm curious what your comfort level is with planning and facilitating group counseling. So 0 fist to 5. 0, like I have no idea. It's been a zillion years since my grad program. I have no idea what I'm doing. To 5, I could teach this course or teach school counselors how to do this. So put your thoughts in the chat. Where are you with comfort and confidence in planning and facilitating group counseling? We've got 3, 4, 5. Right now, kind of middle of the road. And this is not surprising to me. I just read a journal article the other day that one area that school counselors did not do so well in is like the helping relationships and the group counseling portion of school counseling, which is unfortunate because this is the area that we really can thrive in and really show results for students. All right, so most of you are kind of in the middle. So of course, group counseling is really important. And I know a lot of schools don't do it. A lot of school counselors don't do it because either A, they're not comfortable or confident. They don't feel that they have the time. There's not the structures in place for it to happen. But it's really important because group counseling, that small space where students are with other peers, really helps students kind of practice skills with others. We can talk with them over and over and over again about what to do, how to do it, what to think and believe, give them skills. But until they have a chance to practice it in the moment with their peers in real life, it really doesn't make an impact. It also provides them the space to know that they're not alone. I talked with so many students when I was in a building that felt like there was something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with our students. They just don't realize that there are other students that are dealing with some of the same struggles they are. It increases that connection to their peers and their friends. It increases that connection to school, which is so important to show some academic growth. And it really increases your ability to serve students in that more intense needs that they might have. So there's lots of barriers to small groups. Again, limited time and scheduling conflicts, lack of resources, insufficient training and confidence in competing priorities. So that limited time and scheduling conflicts, collaborate with whomever you need to on your schedule. Talk with your staff, talk with your teachers, your administrator. Try and be creative about how you can make it work, and try and be flexible with your scheduling. I know in elementary it's so much easier, at least it was for me, because teachers generally tend to be more socially, emotionally oriented, and they're more likely to allow students to leave their classrooms. In the upper grade levels, it was much more difficult because the focus on content and test scores was so much more important. So sometimes you might have to be flexible as far as which class you would pull them out of. Do you do it just over lunch? You pull from first period one day, second period the next week, third period the following week, etc. Just be flexible, be open, try and find ways to be creative with your scheduling. As far as resources and materials, there are so many digital resources out there. That slide earlier that Sam shared, I believe, are all free resources. I just found out another one today. If I can remember, I will try and link it in that slide deck later. But there's a lot of free digital resources. And then crowdfunding. If your district will let you, see if you could raise funds for some resources that you need. The getting over that lack of training or lack of confidence, just start small. Figure out one group that you want to do with just a few students and just try it and just do it. Or implement a co-facilitator. It doesn't have to be another school counselor. It could be a teacher. It could be a community member. It could be any number of people on your staff. Just having that extra body to kind of monitor the room and help you implement activities and things just really helps. And then those priorities. We have so many things to do and on our plates as school counselors that are school counseling and sometimes non-school counseling related, that it's hard to prioritize group counseling. So if you can collaborate again with other people, delegate some of these tasks to other people when possible, use group data, and just make time. I know for me, there was a lot of times I'd be like, I just don't have time for this. But if I put it on my calendar and scheduled it out, miraculously, I would find time to do it. So just kind of try and make time to do it. It's also important to remember there are different types of groups in schools. Not every group has to be a counseling group where you're struggling with skill building or getting kids through really difficult situations. Some could be just task groups. These are really important too, like FAFSA completion or college application completion or study groups. These also are important for students to interact with their peers and feel that they're not alone in what they're going through. Psychoeducational groups is what tends to be most popular. Those friend groups, test anxiety, helping them make post-secondary decisions. And then of counseling groups. These are the ones that help resolve problems of living. And education is a problem of living. So anger management, if that anger is getting in the way of getting coursework done or paying attention in class, changing families, So students dealing with divorce in their families, death, incarceration, or coping skills. All of these things are important to address in a group setting in your school counseling program. And then lots and lots of steps to group facilitation. So of course, the first thing you need to do is identify the need and type of group. There was so many times, I think I talked about this at the beginning, where somebody would tell me what types of groups students need. Try not to do that. Try to be the person that uses the data to identify the needs and the type of group. It will make it so much easier to facilitate, and it will be much more impactful. You want to determine the size and the makeup of the group. So again, I had people telling me who should be in this group and ended up with way too many kids and the wrong combination of kids in the group, and it failed miserably. So go back to your training, your group counseling training, refresh your memory about size of the group based on developmental level. So like 3 or 4 in kindergarten, you go up to maybe 10 in the high school level, and make sure that these students that you're putting in a group together are going to work well together. Otherwise, you're just going to spend time managing conflicts versus working on the content. The logistics are so very important. Where is this group going to be held? What time? Are we going to be able to get them released from class? Make sure that you have that done. What curriculum are you going to use? What supplies are you going to use? What counseling theory are you going to use? You may not have thought about that much since grad school, but this is very important about how you are going to conceptualize the way that you talk to students and help them process what they're going through. Screening those members, which I talked about. Family informed consent. Decide if you want active or passive consent. I always opted for passive because it was important that they knew, but not always. Sometimes it made it impossible for me to get students in the groups that needed it if it was active, meaning students had to sign a permission slip. But don't inform your student informed assent. If they don't want to be there, it's going to be really hard to make any progress with them. Of course, you want to set group expectations. I always suggest let the group set those expectations with you guiding it. You want to make sure you're progress monitoring as the group goes. So monitoring every week or every other week how their data is looking. Is this group working for them or not? We don't want to keep them in a group that's not working for them. It wastes everybody's time. Don't forget to close the group in a meaningful way to help them apply what they learned and develop a path forward. And then, of course, you need to assess and share the final results. Teachers and administrators and families have allowed you time with these students. Share what has happened because of that.
Okay, so we've done all of this hard work. We've met with our students, and now it's time to look at those results that Angie was talking about that we want to share and assess. So in our example with our 6th graders in chronic absences, my group is over and my time with those 2 individual students is over, and I'm going to look at the attendance data because this was an attendance group. So is there any increase or decrease in their attendance for school? And you have to determine, what are you going to compare? So was I looking at Q1 versus Q2, or am I looking at Q1 from last school year versus Q1 this school year? So you have to determine, what are you comparing with that data? I also want to gather supplemental data again. So can I do some minute meetings with these students? Of course, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get panorama data for the fall and the spring, which I know is not always possible, but that would be great. We could compare. Get parent and teacher feedback. So again, those stakeholders, talking to them and getting their beliefs and input on what's going on, and have they noticed any improvements? And then we want the mindsets and behaviors data, which was our pre-post test questions, to see when we compare our pre-test scores and our post-test scores, was there an increase in their attitude or their knowledge or their skills? And then we can also look at that scaling data when we had them rate the intensity of their feelings as well. So that was for our small group. We want to do something similar for the individual students as well. So again, we want to monitor their attendance and see if there was a change. We want to get feedback for them as well, get feedback from the students, get feedback from parents and teachers. And then for those individuals, we had different goals. So according to their individual goal, was it successful? Did they meet their goal? Participation data, were we able to meet with them as often as we wanted to, or was there a barrier there because of the attendance? So all of these things we want to consider so we can determine what now. So did we see some improvement? Was it effective? Maybe it wasn't long enough. Maybe we did like a 4 to 6 week group and it really needed to be like an 8-week group and we need to meet for a little bit longer. Or maybe that intervention was helpful, but we need another intervention. Of course, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to change the world in a couple of meetings with a student, right? So sometimes the data won't be what we were hoping for, but that really isn't a reflection on you as a school counselor. We need to find out, what is that data telling us? It's not saying that I didn't do a good job. Maybe there's something else that that student needs in addition to what they were getting from me. Let's say they did show a lot of growth and they're attending school more regularly. Maybe we need to then set some individual check-ins over time to keep that momentum, to monitor their progress and make sure that they're still using those skills and the knowledge that they got from their intervention with you. And then again, like Angie said, we want to share our successes and our challenges with teachers, with administrators, parents, stakeholders. If you're part of the MTSS team, you could bring up some challenges there and get some brainstorming ideas on what to do next. Okay, so what is your first next step? What is a resource from today or a tool that you want to try? Or what additional information or support do you think you need with this topic? I feel like we could do a series on this and expand everything we talked about even more. But remember, sometimes it can be overwhelming when you get a lot of new information. Just pick something and just do the next right thing. So what is the next right thing for you and for your students? What's something that you can focus on and try out? Okay, I want to go through just a few things before we wrap up today. I know Angie's also put some really helpful links in the chat, so check those out. Abby, yes, same. Need an assistant for data, she said. Yes, absolutely. Thank you guys for attending today. We really appreciate it. And we want to make sure that you're getting credit for this. So if you want a PGP that you can save for renewing your license, all you have to do is use this link and then it asks you like 2 or 3 questions and then it will email you the documentation for that. And again, we can put the slides in the chat again, just so you can have all these links. And we want to just make you aware of some things coming up from Counselor Connect. And Amanda, you can jump in at any time. But this is an amazing graphic with showing how much we have coming up. So we just had our coffee talk last week with Flora Jones. And today we had our session, but you can see there's a lot coming up for the rest of January, February, and even into March. And you can find all of these and register for them at Kennel, KINL.cc/counseling, which is at the bottom of the screen there. And don't forget, National School Counselor Week is coming up, and ASCA has a lot of resources that are free that you can use to celebrate and really focus on advocating for the profession and awareness of what we do as school counselors. And don't forget, we have a lot of resources for free from Counselor Connect. We have our digital content library where you can go and if there's a specific topic that you want to learn more about, there's a lot of recorded sessions like this one saved where you can go and look and watch those asynchronously for yourself. We also have the school counseling curriculum library, which is amazing, by the way, if you haven't checked that out. There's 49 lessons with the ASCA lesson plan template for all of the domains, K to 12, all for free. So check that out. And then Amanda also always does this, which is awesome. She puts together the calendar with a lot of important dates for student service professionals. And if you need anything, stay connected, sign up for the newsletter so you know what's coming up, email us anytime. And I'll stay on here for a few minutes if anyone has any specific questions that they want answered today. Anything else, Amanda or Angie? Okay, well, thank you so much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Someone said, is there a link for CEUs? We do not have CEUs, unfortunately. We've been working on that for a while, but we do have PGPs available. And I'll put the slides in there just one more time, just in case. The PGPs are, it's a link that's at the end of the slides. Let me stop recording here.